I crashed my husband's secret wedding after finding out he never divorced me. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, I didn't just raise my hand. I held up our marriage certificate. Right now, I am standing at the back of a breathtakingly opulent, sunlit country club in the Hamptons. The floral arrangements alone probably cost more than my entire annual salary as a data analyst. Up at the altar, looking like a spread from a luxury magazine, is Julian. He is wearing a bespoke tuxedo, flashing that signature, dimpled smile that used to make my heart skip a beat. Next to him is Chloe, a beautiful 28-year-old heiress draped in custom Vera Wang. She looks at him like he is her entire world, her protector, her soulmate. She has absolutely no idea who he really is. She doesn't know about his lies, his debts, or his uncanny ability to morph into whatever the person in front of him wants to see. But more importantly, she doesn't know about the thick manila folder currently sweating in my grip. Inside this folder isn't a speech or a wedding gift. It contains a freshly stamped, certified document from the county clerk's office with a heavy, raised seal. It is the undeniable, legally binding proof of the crime Julian is about to commit right here in front of 300 high society guests. You see, Julian thinks he is the smartest guy in every room. He thinks he can just overwrite his past like a bad line of code and start fresh whenever it suits his financial ambitions. He thinks the woman standing at the back of the aisle is nothing but a distant, erased memory. I am Emma, the woman he promised to love and cherish forever just 5 years ago. I am the woman he casually discarded when my practical, quiet life no longer fit his grand, luxurious vision for his own future. He told me our divorce was a done deal, finalized and buried 2 years ago. I believed him, trusting the man I once loved to handle the paperwork. That was the biggest mistake of my life, but today, I am making it his. I watch him take Chloe's hands, his eyes shining with fake devotion, ready to seal the deal on a billion-dollar fortune. He leans in to whisper something to his beautiful, wealthy, completely oblivious bride. He is about to learn that you cannot marry a billionaire while your wife is watching. To understand how I ended up crashing a multi-million-dollar wedding, we have to rewind exactly 2 years. Our split wasn't dramatic. There were no thrown plates, no screaming matches in the rain, and no dramatic infidelity discoveries, at least, none that I knew of at the time. Julian just sat me down one Tuesday after my long shift at the data firm and told me we were growing in different directions. He wanted a life of endless networking, luxury cars, and high-risk investments. I wanted a cozy apartment, stable savings, and weekend hikes. We were fundamentally incompatible, and honestly, I was too exhausted to fight for a marriage that felt like a business transaction. "Look, Emma," he had said, using that buttery, persuasive tone that could sell ice to an Eskimo. "Lawyers are just going to drain whatever small savings we have left. My buddy Greg is a paralegal. Let him draw up the papers, we sign them, and I'll walk them down to the courthouse myself. Clean, easy, and completely free." It sounded so incredibly reasonable. Why would you waste thousands of dollars fighting over a modest apartment and a 5-year-old Honda Civic? We had no kids, no shared real estate, no complex assets. I signed the meticulously typed papers he put in front of me a week later. He kissed my forehead, packed his designer bags, and walked out of my life. I genuinely felt a profound sense of relief. I moved into a smaller, quieter place. I threw myself into my work as a data analyst, organizing messy databases and finding patterns in chaos. I rebuilt my life piece by piece, assuming my past was neatly boxed up and archived in some dusty municipal basement. I never followed up to ask for the final decree. I never demanded the stamped copy. I just took a charming liar at his absolute word. When someone tells you an unpleasant task is handled, you naturally want to believe them, especially when you are grieving the end of a long relationship. I thought I was free to move on and eventually find someone who actually valued my steady, predictable nature. I was blissfully living my quiet, independent life, totally unaware of the invisible chains still binding me to him. I had no idea my peaceful new reality was actually a ticking legal time bomb. The illusion of my clean break shattered on a random Tuesday, exactly 2 years after Julian walked out. I had just gotten home from work, dropped my keys on the counter, and started sifting through the mail. Amidst the usual grocery store flyers and credit card offers was an austere, official-looking envelope from the Internal Revenue Service. My stomach did that immediate, involuntary drop that everyone experiences when the IRS reaches out. I tore it open, expecting a minor miscalculation from my recent tax return. Instead, I stared at a notice flag for a filing status discrepancy. The letter stated that my return, filed as single, conflicted with my current legal marital status on record. What would you do if you realized your past was a legal lie? At first, I just laughed out loud. I assumed it was a bureaucratic glitch, a misplaced keystroke by some exhausted government worker in a windowless room. I picked up my phone and immediately dialed my accountant, a no-nonsense woman named Brenda who had handled my taxes for years. Brenda, the IRS is hallucinating, I joked, reading the notice to her over the phone. But Brenda didn't laugh. There was a long, terrifying pause on the other end of the line. Emma, she said, her voice dropping an octave. The IRS systems pull directly from state registries. They don't usually make this specific kind of mistake. You need to verify your marital status with the county clerk immediately. If your ex-husband never filed those papers, you are legally liable for any financial mess he's created over the last 2 years. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Annoyance evaporated, instantly replaced by a cold, creeping dread that settled deep in my bones. Julian was notoriously reckless with money. He loved taking out massive loans to fund his lifestyle, always banking on the next big payout. If we were still married, his debts could legally become my massive debts. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the device. I sprinted to my filing cabinet and tore through my meticulously organized folders. Nothing. I had no final decree, no case number, nothing but the memory of him promising to take care of it. I desperately prayed it was a clerical error, but my gut was already screaming the truth. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I drove to the downtown county courthouse, my anxiety spiking with every mile. The building was a depressing monolith of gray concrete and harsh, flickering fluorescent lights. I pulled a paper ticket and waited on a hard wooden bench for 45 agonizing minutes. Finally, my number was called. I stepped up to the thick plexiglass window and handed my ID to a bored-looking clerk named Doris. I need to request a copy of my final divorce decree, I said, my voice trembling slightly. It should have been filed roughly 2 years ago. Last name is Miller. Doris began clacking away on her ancient keyboard, her eyes squinting at the glowing blue monitor. The clacking stopped. She frowned, hit a few more keys, and sighed loudly. Ma'am, there is no divorce decree on file for an Emma and Julian Miller. There isn't even a petition for dissolution of marriage. According to the state registry, your marriage license from 2018 is still fully active. The fluorescent lights above me seemed to buzz louder, drowning out the ambient noise of the room. The floor tilted beneath my feet. That's impossible, I gasped, pressing my hands against the cold counter to steady myself. He said he filed them. We signed the papers. Doris gave me a look of profound pity that I will never forget. I'm sorry, honey. People lie. You are 100% legally married. I stumbled out of the courthouse and collapsed into the driver's seat of my car. I pulled out my phone and dialed Julian's number. It rang once, then clicked into an automated voice message telling me the subscriber was unavailable. I was blocked. He had completely vanished from my life, leaving me legally tethered to whatever chaotic schemes he was running. Panic gave way to a burning, white-hot fury. My meticulous, perfectly ordered life was a complete sham. I wasn't just betrayed. I was financially and legally exposed. I needed answers, and I needed them immediately. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, determined to find him. If Julian thought he could hide this, he severely underestimated a data analyst. I didn't even make it inside my apartment before dialing my best friend, Sarah. Sarah is a cybersecurity consultant with the tenacity of a starving honey badger. If someone leaves a digital footprint anywhere on the internet, she can track it down. I'm on my way, she said the second I explained the courthouse disaster. She arrived 20 minutes later armed with 2 large iced coffees and her high-powered laptop. We set up mission control on my dining table. Okay, Sarah said, cracking her knuckles. Let's find this ghost. We started with the obvious routes. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Nothing. Julian had completely scrubbed his old digital identity. The accounts I used to tag him in were either deleted or suspended. It was as if the man I married had ceased to exist. He's thorough, Sarah muttered, her fingers flying across the keyboard. But nobody is totally invisible. He has to exist somewhere. Hours ticked by. We searched public records, real estate listings, and business registries. Finally, around midnight, we caught our first break. Sarah ran a reverse image search using an old photo of Julian from a mutual friend's wedding. The search engine pinged a match on a philanthropic newsletter for a charity gala in Manhattan. Sarah clicked the link and zoomed in on the background of a high society event photo. There he was, but he looked completely different. The man in the picture was wearing a bespoke tuxedo, his hair styled immaculately, sipping champagne next to a stunning blonde woman dripping in diamonds. The caption below the photo read, "Tech entrepreneur Julian Vance and his lovely partner attending the annual gala." Vance. He was using his middle name as his last name. He had completely reinvented himself as a wealthy elite. "Look at the watch on his wrist," Sarah pointed out, tapping the screen. "That's a Patek Philippe. It costs more than your entire apartment. How the hell did he afford that?" I stared at the screen, my mind racing. He hadn't just moved on. He had leveled up into a completely different stratosphere of society. The charming liar I married had evolved into a high-stakes con man living a double life. Armed with his new alias, Julian Vance, the floodgates opened. Sarah bypassed his blocked social media and started searching through the society pages and luxury event planners in the tri-state area. It didn't take long for her to strike absolute gold. "Emma," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a shocked whisper. "You need to see this." I walked around the table and stared at her screen. It was a customized, highly secure luxury wedding website. The landing page featured a breathtaking, cinematic video of Julian and the blonde woman from the gala running along a private beach. Elegant, gold-embossed text faded onto the screen, "Julian and Chloe. A love written in the stars." I scrolled down, my heart pounding in my throat. Chloe wasn't just any woman. According to the overly flowery Our Story section, she was Chloe Sterling, the only daughter of Arthur Sterling, a notoriously ruthless real estate billionaire. The wedding date was plastered across the bottom of the page in a massive, elegant font. It was this coming Saturday, 5 days from now. Suddenly, the entire twisted puzzle snapped together in my mind, forming a horrifying picture. The motive clicked perfectly. Julian hadn't forgotten to file our divorce papers. He deliberately didn't file them because a legal divorce requires full financial disclosure. It creates a public record of assets, debts, and income. If he had filed, he would have had to admit he was completely broke. He needed to maintain a flawless, wealthy facade to infiltrate Chloe's elite circle. A divorce would have exposed his humble beginnings and his mountain of debt to her fiercely protective father. He was going to commit bigamy to secure a billion-dollar meal ticket, betting everything on the assumption that his quiet, practical wife would never double-check her legal status. He thought I was too passive, too stupid to ever figure it out. I stared at the smiling face of the man who had legally trapped me in his web of lies, feeling a sudden surge of pure, unfiltered adrenaline. He thought he had outsmarted me, but he had just handed me the ultimate weapon. The next morning, I sat in the polished, mahogany-paneled office of a cutthroat family law attorney Sarah had recommended. I laid out the facts, the IRS letter, the active marriage certificate, and the printouts of the wedding website. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Helen, reviewed the documents with raised eyebrows. "Well," Helen said, leaning back in her leather chair, "this is a textbook case of bigamy, which is a classy felony in this state. If he signs that new marriage license on Saturday, he is committing a serious crime. We can file an emergency injunction to halt the wedding, notify the local authorities, and have him served quietly. You'll be legally protected, and your divorce can proceed immediately." I considered her words. The quiet, practical Emma would have taken that route. Send the police, file the papers, stay far away from the drama, and wash my hands of the entire mess. But as I sat there, picturing Julian standing at an altar, smugly slipping a ring onto a billionaire's daughter's finger, my blood began to boil. He had stolen 2 years of my life. He had jeopardized my financial future to fund his sociopathic social climb. Quietly serving him felt like a pathetic slap on the wrist for a man who deserved a public execution. I left the lawyer's office undecided and met Sarah for lunch. I explained the legal options, tracing the rim of my coffee cup. Sarah looked at me, a dangerous glint in her eyes. Emma, if you do this quietly, he spins the narrative. He tells Chloe you're a crazy, jealous ex trying to ruin his life. He plays the victim. He's a chameleon, remember? He will talk his way out of it. She leaned across the table. Don't stop the wedding before it happens. Let him stand up there. Let all his high society friends gather. Let him dig his own grave in front of the one man he fears most. I looked into Sarah's eyes, feeling the last remnants of my passive self burn away. It was time to stop being the collateral damage and start being the absolute reckoning. With exactly 3 days left until the ceremony, we shifted into full espionage mode. First, I went back to the fluorescent hell of the county clerk's office. I didn't just ask for one copy of my active marriage certificate. I paid for 5 freshly stamped, officially certified copies with the heavy, undeniable raised seal of the state. These were my weapons, and I wanted enough ammunition to supply the entire front row if necessary. Next, Sarah and I mapped out the battlefield. The wedding was being held at the Sterling family's private country club estate, a sprawling fortress of old money and extreme security. Sarah creatively accessed the digital floor plans from the catering company's open directory. We studied the layout like generals planning a siege. We memorized the locations of the valet stations, the servant entrances, and the exact placement of the ceremony seating on the south lawn. But to get close enough to strike, I needed camouflage. I couldn't walk into a billionaire's wedding looking like a mid-level data analyst. I drained a painful chunk of my savings account and walked into a high-end boutique downtown. I needed to look like I belonged. I chose a sleek, navy blue silk gown that screamed understated, generational wealth. It was elegant, unbranded, and perfectly tailored. Paired with a rented designer clutch to hide my manila folder and a simple, classic blowout, I looked completely transformed. Staring at myself in the boutique mirror, I barely recognized the woman looking back. The timid girl who had signed away her marriage to save a few bucks was completely gone. In her place stood a woman holding an undeniable truth, ready to burn a con man's world to the ground. Sarah stood behind me, nodding in sheer approval at the transformation. We spent the entire evening rehearsing our timing, anticipating every possible security check, and planning our escape routes. Every detail was meticulously calculated to ensure maximum, unavoidable destruction for Julian. The trap was perfectly set, but the hardest part was actually walking into the lion's den. Friday night, the eve of destruction, I sat on the floor of my quiet apartment, staring at the 5 crisp, certified documents spread out on my coffee table. The adrenaline that had fueled me all week suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a crushing wave of intense doubt and anxiety. My hands were visibly shaking. Was I really going to do this? Was I actually going to walk into a stranger's wedding, surrounded by hundreds of the most powerful people in the state, and publicly humiliate a man who could potentially destroy my life in retaliation? A small, cowardly voice in my head begged me to just call the lawyer, file the injunction, and go to sleep. I poured myself a glass of wine, trying to steady my racing heart. I closed my eyes, and instantly, a memory of Julian surfaced. It was the night before he left. I had asked him, softly, if there was someone else. If there was a reason he was throwing us away so easily. He had looked at me with this sickening blend of pity and utter condescension. Emma, please, he had sighed, patting my hand like I was a slow child. Don't be paranoid. You're just too simple for the life I'm meant to live. Be grateful I'm making this easy for you. The memory felt like a physical slap across the face. He didn't just leave me. He gaslighted me, manipulated me, and left me legally vulnerable so he could play dress-up with a billionaire's daughter. He thought I was weak. He thought I was simple. My fear instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I wasn't just doing this for revenge. I was doing it because Chloe, the naive bride currently dreaming of her perfect day, deserved to know she was marrying a financial predator. I carefully stacked the certified certificates, slid them into the manila folder, and placed it inside my rented designer clutch. I took a deep breath, the hesitation entirely gone from my system. I finally closed my eyes and slept like a woman who had nothing left to lose. Saturday afternoon arrived with perfectly clear, mocking blue skies. Sarah drove her unassuming sedan up the winding, impeccably manicured road leading to the Sterling Country Club estate. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. As we approached the massive wrought iron gates, the security presence became clear. Men in dark suits with earpieces were cross-referencing names on iPads. "Showtime," Sarah muttered, gripping the steering wheel. We executed the plan flawlessly. Sarah pulled the car slightly out of line, feigning a stalled engine and a sheer panic attack. As two security guards jogged over to assist the distressed woman blocking the main entrance, I quietly slipped out of the passenger side, blending seamlessly into a group of elderly, wealthy-looking guests stepping out of a hired town car. I kept my head down, matching their slow, entitled pace as we bypassed the distracted gatekeepers and walked straight onto the grounds. The sheer, sickening opulence of the venue hit me like a physical wall. There were towers of imported white orchids, string quartets playing on the terrace, and waiters carrying trays of vintage champagne. Everywhere I looked, there was aggressive, unimaginable wealth. This was the empire Julian was trying to steal. I navigated through the crowd of silk and diamonds, keeping a low profile behind large floral arrangements. I spotted Arthur Sterling, the billionaire father, holding court near the front row. He looked terrifyingly stern, exactly like a man who destroyed rival companies for sport. I gripped my clutch, feeling the hard edges of the manila folder against my palm. I slipped down the side aisle of the outdoor seating area, making my way to the very back row just as the ushers began directing guests to take their seats. I sat down, practically invisible among a row of distant cousins and business associates. The string quartet stopped playing, and a sudden, expectant hush fell over the expansive lawn. The music shifted to the wedding march, and the final act of his play truly began. From my vantage point in the back row, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the altar. The heavy, dramatic chords of the bridal chorus echoed across the manicured lawn. The crowd collectively stood up, and there he was. Julian stepped out from the side of the floral archway, taking his place at the altar. I hadn't seen him in the flesh for 2 years, and the sight of him made my stomach churn with a toxic mix of anger and disgust. He looked like absolute perfection. His bespoke tuxedo fit him flawlessly, his hair was perfectly coiffed, and he wore an expression of deep, reverent emotion. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. He looked incredibly smug, radiating the triumphant energy of a grifter who realizes he has finally pulled off the ultimate heist. He was minutes away from locking in a billion-dollar meal ticket. Then, Chloe appeared at the start of the aisle. She was undeniably beautiful, glowing with genuine happiness. She clutched a bouquet of white peonies, her eyes locked onto Julian with absolute, unwavering trust. As she walked slowly down the aisle, guided by her intimidating father, Arthur, I felt a sharp pang of guilt. I was about to destroy the best day of her life. But as I watched Julian wipe a fake tear from his eye, the guilt evaporated. If I stayed silent, her life would be destroyed anyway, bled dry by a parasitic con man who would drain her family's accounts and leave her emotionally shattered. This wasn't cruelty, this was a rescue mission. Arthur handed his daughter over to Julian, giving him a stern, assessing look before taking his seat in the front row. The officiant, a regal-looking judge, stepped up to the microphone. He cleared his throat, his booming voice echoing across the silent, expectant crowd. The standard welcoming remarks flowed by in a blur as I unclasped my designer bag and slid the manila folder out. My hands were completely steady now. I gripped the thick, certified papers, waiting for the single sentence that would ignite the room. The officiant moved through the solemn vows, his voice echoing over the gentle rustle of the wind. I tuned out the poetry and the promises, my entire being focused intensely on the upcoming procedural question. And so, the officiant intoned, looking out over the sea of wealthy guests. If anyone here knows any just cause why these two may not be lawfully joined together in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional silence that followed usually lasted 3 seconds. I didn't even give it one. I stood up. The sudden movement caught the eye of the people immediately around me, but it was the sharp, echoing crack of my heels stepping onto the marble center aisle that shattered the silence. Hundreds of heads swiveled toward me in synchronized confusion. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, deliberately down the center aisle, holding the manila folder in my right hand. Julian's eyes found me, and I watched in real time as the color completely drained from his perfectly tanned face. He looked like he had just seen a ghost armed with a shotgun. Chloe looked confused, glancing between me and her terrified groom. "I object," I said. My voice was ice-cold, perfectly steady, and loud enough to carry without a microphone. Gasps rippled through the affluent crowd. Whispers broke out instantly. I stopped 10 feet from the altar, making direct, unbroken eye contact with the man who thought I was too simple to fight back. "I object because the groom is already married," I stated clearly, cutting through the rising murmurs like a blade. "I should know. I am his wife." The collective gasp from the audience was deafening, echoing off the stone walls. Chloe physically recoiled in horror, dropping her bouquet onto the cold marble floor. Julian opened his mouth, his charismatic facade crumbling into absolute panic as he desperately searched for a lie to save himself. He tried to dismiss me as a crazy person, but facts do not care about charisma. "Security!" Julian suddenly yelled, his voice cracking horribly. He forced a frantic, manic laugh, turning to Chloe and then to the crowd, sweating profusely. "This is a prank. She's an obsessed stalker. I have absolutely no idea who this crazy woman is. Please, someone get her out of here." Security guards began rushing down the side aisles, but before they could reach me, Arthur Sterling stood up from the front row. He held up a single, authoritative hand, instantly freezing the guards in their tracks. The billionaire stepped into the aisle, his eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. He looked from his sweating, trembling future son-in-law to me. "Who are you?" Arthur demanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "My name is Emma Miller," I said, holding out the manila folder directly to him. "And you don't have to take my word for it. Here are 5 legally certified copies of our active marriage certificate, stamped 3 days ago by the county clerk. He never filed the divorce papers to hide his financial ruin from your family." Arthur snatched the folder from my hand. The silence in the venue was so absolute you could hear the rustle of the thick paper as he pulled out the documents. He traced the raised state seal with his thumb, his eyes scanning the irrefutable legal proof. He looked up, and the pure, unadulterated fury in his eyes made even me take a step back. Julian stepped off the altar, his hands raised in surrender. "Arthur, please, I can explain. It's a misunderstanding." "You parasitic son of a bitch," Arthur growled. Chloe burst into hysterical tears, collapsing into the arms of her bridesmaids. The crowd erupted into absolute chaos. Shouting, crying, people pulling out their phones to record the disaster. The perfect, multi-million-dollar illusion had shattered into a million irreparable pieces in less than 60 seconds. I turned around and walked back up the aisle, leaving a spectacular wreckage in my wake. I didn't stay for the ensuing bloodbath. As I walked out through the iron gates to where Sarah was waiting in the getaway car, I could hear Arthur screaming orders at his security detail to physically remove Julian from the property. The drive home was fueled by pure adrenaline and Sarah's triumphant laughter. By the time we reached my apartment, my phone was blowing up. Julian had somehow circumvented the block I placed on his number and was leaving a barrage of furious, desperate voicemails. The first few messages were pure rage, threatening to sue me for defamation, screaming that I had ruined his entire life and cost him millions. By the third voicemail, his tone shifted to pathetic begging, pleading with me to tell Arthur it was all a big mistake. I deleted them all without responding. His threats were entirely empty, and his downfall was incredibly swift. Arthur Sterling is not a man who lets an insult go unpunished. The wedding was immediately canceled, and Arthur deployed his army of corporate lawyers to systematically dismantle Julian's life. Because Julian had forged documents and lied on loan applications using his fake, Vance identity to fund his luxurious facade, Arthur easily handed him over to the authorities. 3 days after the ruined wedding, Julian was arrested at a cheap motel for multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and attempted bigamy. The local news ran his mugshot. He looked disheveled, defeated, and stripped of all his expensive grooming. The charming chameleon had finally been trapped in a cage of his own making. I sat in my living room, watching the news report with a hot cup of tea, feeling a profound sense of justice. The man who had manipulated me, hidden behind my legal status, and mocked my practical life was completely ruined. He had gambled his entire existence on a massive, sociopathic lie, and he had lost everything in spectacular fashion because he underestimated the quiet woman he left behind. The ultimate revenge wasn't just exposing him. It was legally severing myself from his burning ship. The aftermath of the country club explosion was swift and brutally efficient. With Julian sitting in a county jail awaiting trial for fraud, securing my actual divorce was incredibly simple. My lawyer, Helen, filed the paperwork citing irreconcilable differences and egregious misconduct. The judge expedited the process, and within 6 weeks, I finally held the officially stamped, certified decree of dissolution in my hands. I was truly, legally free. Chloe's father, Arthur, actually reached out to me through his legal team to thank me for saving his daughter from a catastrophic mistake, though I politely declined his offer of a financial reward. I didn't do it for his money. I did it to reclaim my own agency. Looking back on the absolute chaos of the past few months, I learned a vital, unshakable lesson about trust. When someone shows you who they are, believe them, but always verify the paperwork. Manipulators thrive in the shadows of assumed trust and unspoken agreements. They rely on good, honest people taking them at their word to avoid conflict. But the truth is incredibly stubborn, and it always leaves a paper trail if you are brave enough to go looking for it. I still live in my quiet, comfortable apartment. I still work as a data analyst, finding comfort in the absolute, objective truth of numbers and facts. My life is predictable, practical, and entirely my own. I don't regret the explosive way I ended things. Sometimes, to protect your peace, you have to be willing to start a war. To anyone going through a separation, my advice is brutally simple. Never let your ex hold the pen that writes your future. Always demand the receipts, check the public records, and never, ever assume the ghost of your past is fully buried until you see the legal dirt yourself. I finally closed the manila folder for the last time, ready to write my own ending.